Sarah Martinez had always believed that serving others was her calling in life. At 28 years old, she worked as a volunteer coordinator at the local Veterans Center in Camp Pendleton, California. Every morning she would arrive at 6 o'clock sharp, her bright smile greeting the early arrivals who came, seeking assistance with everything from medical appointments to job applications. The Veterans Center was more than just a building to Sarah. It was a sanctuary where broken souls found hope, where men and women who had sacrificed everything for their country could find the support they desperately needed. Sarah had grown up in a military family, watching her father struggle with his own demons after returning from overseas deployments. She understood the invisible wounds that many carried, and she made it her mission to be the bridge between their pain and their healing. On this particular Tuesday morning in October, the center was busier than usual. A group of 500 Marines had recently returned from a grueling deployment in Afghanistan, and many were struggling with the transition back to civilian life. The phone rang constantly, families sought guidance, and the waiting room overflowed with young faces that looked far older than their years. Sarah moved through the chaos with practiced grace, her clipboard in hand as she coordinated appointments, connected families with counselors, and ensured that no one left without the help they needed. She had been working 16-hour days for the past 2 weeks, determined that every single Marine would receive the support they deserved. Her colleague, Michael, noticed the dark circles under her eyes and the way she occasionally steadied herself against the wall. "Sarah, you need to take a break," he said, placing a concerned hand on her shoulder. "You've been running on empty for days." Sarah brushed off his concern with a tired smile. "These Marines didn't get breaks during their deployment," she replied, her voice carrying the weight of her conviction. "The least I can do is be here for them now. They've given everything for us, Michael. Everything." As the morning progressed, Sarah noticed a young Marine sitting alone in the corner of the waiting room. His name was David Thompson, barely 21 years old, and she could see the haunted look in his eyes that she had learned to recognize. He had been coming to the center for 3 days straight, always sitting in the same chair, always leaving without speaking to anyone. Sarah approached him gently, her voice soft and understanding. "David, I'm Sarah. I've seen you here before. Would you like to talk to someone today?" The young Marine looked up at her, his eyes filled with a mixture of gratitude and pain. For the first time in days, he nodded. What Sarah didn't know was that this simple act of reaching out to David would set in motion a series of events that would test her own limits and ultimately reveal the true depth of her dedication to serving others. As she led David toward a counselor's office, she felt a slight dizziness that she attributed to skipping breakfast again. The day was just beginning, and Sarah had no idea that by evening her life would be forever changed by her unwavering commitment to those who had served their country. As the afternoon wore on, Sarah found herself coordinating an emergency support group session for 15 Marines who were struggling with severe anxiety and depression. The regular counselor had called in sick, and there was no one else available to lead the session. Without hesitation, Sarah stepped up, despite having no formal training in group therapy. She gathered the Marines in the community room, arranging the chairs in a circle and speaking from her heart about the importance of brotherhood and seeking help. Her genuine care and understanding created a safe space where these hardened warriors began to open up about their struggles. Stories of lost comrades, survivor's guilt, and the difficulty of readjusting to civilian life filled the room. David Thompson was among the group, and for the first time since his return, he began to speak about the nightmares that haunted him every night. Sarah listened intently, offering words of encouragement and connecting each Marine with specific resources that could help them. She took detailed notes, ensuring that each person would receive follow-up care. During the session, Sarah began to feel increasingly lightheaded. The room seemed to spin slightly, and she found herself gripping the edge of her chair to maintain her composure. She attributed the symptoms to exhaustion and continued leading the discussion, refusing to let her personal discomfort interfere with the Marines' healing process. By 4 o'clock, word had spread throughout the base about the incredible support session Sarah had facilitated. More Marines began arriving at the center, seeking the same kind of understanding and care they had heard about from their fellow service members. The waiting room filled beyond capacity, with Marines sitting on the floor and standing along the walls. Sarah looked at the crowd and felt a surge of determination. These brave men and women had faced enemy fire, lived in harsh conditions, and witnessed unspeakable horrors. The least she could do was provide them with a comfortable place to seek help. She immediately began making phone calls to arrange for additional counselors, coordinate transportation for those who needed to get to medical appointments, and organize an impromptu resource fair. Her supervisor, Colonel Patricia Hayes, arrived at the center around 5 o'clock and was amazed by what she witnessed. The usually chaotic environment had been transformed into a well-organized support network, with Marines helping other Marines navigate the various services available to them. Sarah was at the center of it all, her energy seemingly inexhaustible despite her obvious fatigue. "Martinez, you've outdone yourself today," Colonel Hayes said, pulling Sarah aside. "But you look like you're about to collapse. When's the last time you ate something?" Sarah paused, trying to remember. She had grabbed a cup of coffee that morning, but she couldn't recall eating any actual food. "I'll eat later, Colonel. Right now, these Marines need our attention more than I need a meal." The Colonel frowned, noting the slight tremor in Sarah's hands and the way she seemed to sway slightly on her feet. "That's an order, Martinez. Go get something to eat and take a 30-minute break." But before Sarah could respond, a commotion erupted near the entrance. A Marine named Carlos Ramirez had suffered a panic attack and was struggling to breathe. Sarah immediately rushed to his side, kneeling down and speaking in calm, soothing tones while guiding him through breathing exercises she had learned from watching the counselors work with other veterans. As Carlos began to calm down, Sarah felt the room spinning more violently than before. Black spots danced at the edges of her vision, but she maintained her focus on the distressed Marine, holding his hand and assuring him that he was safe, that he was home, and that he was surrounded by people who cared about him. By 7 o'clock that evening, Sarah had been on her feet for 13 consecutive hours, having arrived before dawn to prepare for what she knew would be a challenging day. The Veterans Center was still bustling with activity, but now it had taken on the atmosphere of a community gathering rather than a clinical facility. Marines who had received help earlier in the day had returned with their families, eager to introduce them to the woman who had made such a profound impact on their lives. Sarah moved through the crowd, checking on each person individually, ensuring that everyone had received the resources they needed. She carried a notebook filled with names, contact information, and detailed notes about each Marine's specific situation. Her dedication to follow through was legendary among the staff, and she had already begun planning the next day's activities to continue supporting these brave service members. Maria Santos, the wife of Marine Sergeant Luis Santos, approached Sarah with tears in her eyes. "Miss Martinez, I don't know how to thank you. Luis has been home for 3 weeks, and today is the first time I've seen him smile since he returned. Whatever you said to him, whatever you did, it worked. You gave me my husband back." Sarah felt a warmth spread through her chest despite her physical exhaustion. These moments made every long hour, every skipped meal, every sleepless night worthwhile. She hugged Maria gently and assured her that Luis had found his own strength. She had simply helped him remember it was there. As the evening progressed, Sarah noticed that several Marines had organized themselves into informal support groups, sharing phone numbers and making plans to meet regularly. David Thompson, the young Marine who had been sitting alone that morning, was now actively encouraging another newcomer who had just arrived at the center. The transformation was remarkable, and Sarah felt a deep sense of pride watching these warriors support one another. However, Sarah's physical condition was deteriorating rapidly. The dizziness that had been manageable throughout the day was now accompanied by nausea and severe fatigue. She found herself leaning against walls more frequently and had to pause several times to catch her breath. Her vision would occasionally blur, forcing her to blink hard to refocus. Michael, her colleague, had been watching her with growing concern throughout the day. He approached her around 8 o'clock, noting the pale complexion and slight tremor in her hands. "Sarah, you need medical attention. You're clearly not well, and you're pushing yourself beyond reasonable limits." Sarah shook her head stubbornly. "I can't leave now, Michael. Look around you." This is exactly what these Marines needed. They're finding hope again, they're connecting with each other, and they're beginning to heal. If I leave now, I'll disrupt the momentum we've built today. What Sarah didn't realize was that her dedication had become legendary throughout the base. Word of her tireless efforts had spread from Marine to Marine, and many who hadn't initially planned to visit the Veterans Center were making their way over. curious about the civilian woman who was reportedly working miracles with their fellow service members. By 8:30, the center had become the unofficial gathering place for the entire battalion. Colonel Hayes had returned with several other senior officers, all amazed by the transformation they witnessed. The usually sterile government building had become a warm, welcoming space where healing was taking place on a massive scale. Sarah was in the middle of coordinating a group discussion about job placement opportunities when she felt a sudden, sharp pain in her chest. She paused mid-sentence, placing her hand over her heart and taking a deep breath. The Marines in the circle immediately noticed her distress, their protective instincts kicking in as they surrounded her with concern. At 9 o'clock, Sarah was attempting to coordinate sleeping arrangements for several Marines who had traveled from distant locations and needed a place to stay overnight. She had already contacted local churches and community organizations, securing temporary housing for those in need. Her phone rang constantly with updates, confirmations, and new requests for assistance. The chest pain she had experienced earlier had subsided, but now she was dealing with severe shortness of breath. Each conversation required tremendous effort, and she found herself having to pause frequently to gather enough air to speak clearly. The Marines around her began to notice that something was seriously wrong, but Sarah continued to deflect their concerns with reassuring smiles and gentle jokes about getting old. Sergeant David Thompson, the young Marine who had been transformed by Sarah's care earlier that day, appointed himself as her unofficial guardian. He stayed close by, ready to assist with whatever she needed, and began intercepting some of the more routine tasks to reduce her workload. Other Marines followed his example, creating an informal support network around the woman who had been supporting them all day. "Ma'am, you've done enough for one day," David said gently, his voice filled with the same care and concern that Sarah had shown him that morning. "Let us help you now. You've taught us about accepting support when we need it. Maybe it's time you took your own advice." Sarah looked around at the faces surrounding her, each one reflecting genuine care and gratitude. These were the same Marines who had arrived that morning carrying invisible wounds and feeling isolated from the world. Now they were united in their concern for her well-being, demonstrating the healing and growth that had taken place throughout the day. Despite her deteriorating condition, Sarah felt compelled to complete one final task. She had promised to personally contact the families of 3 Marines who had been struggling with thoughts of self-harm, ensuring they had the support they needed through the night. She made the phone calls, speaking with each family member and connecting them with crisis counselors, her voice growing weaker with each conversation. By 9:30, approximately 200 Marines and their family members had gathered at the Veterans Center. What had begun as a routine day of providing services had evolved into an unprecedented community event. Local news crews had arrived after receiving tips about the extraordinary outpouring of support taking place at the base. Sarah was coordinating with the kitchen staff to arrange food for the crowd when she felt her legs begin to give way beneath her. She grabbed onto a nearby table, steadying herself as waves of dizziness washed over her. The room seemed to tilt and spin, and she could hear her heartbeat pounding in her ears. Colonel Hayes, who had been observing Sarah's decline throughout the evening, immediately stepped forward. "Martinez, that's enough. You're going to the medical facility right now, and that's a direct order." But Sarah's attention was drawn to a commotion near the entrance where a Marine named Roberto Vasquez had just arrived in obvious distress. He had been struggling with severe depression since his return and had come to the center as a last resort before making a decision that couldn't be undone. Sarah recognized the desperation in his eyes immediately. Without hesitation, despite her failing physical condition, Sarah approached Roberto with the same gentle compassion she had shown every other person that day. She spoke to him quietly, away from the crowd, listening to his pain and helping him understand that his feelings were temporary, that help was available, and that his life had value beyond his current darkness. As she spoke with Roberto, connecting him with immediate crisis support and ensuring he had someone to stay with that night, Sarah felt a strange sense of peace wash over her. She had accomplished everything she had set out to do that day and more. Every Marine who had walked through the doors had received care, attention, and hope. At 10 o'clock, as Sarah finished ensuring Roberto's safety and watched him leave with a fellow Marine who had volunteered to stay with him through the night, she felt an overwhelming sense of accomplishment mixed with complete physical exhaustion. The Veterans Center had become a beacon of hope, With Marines continuing to arrive seeking the support they had heard about from their brothers in arms. Sarah attempted to make her way to her desk to organize the files and notes she had accumulated throughout the day, wanting to ensure that tomorrow's follow-up efforts would be seamless. However, as she took her first few steps, her vision began to tunnel dramatically. The sounds around her became muffled and distant, as if she were hearing them through water. Michael noticed her unsteady gait and immediately moved to her side. "Sarah, please, you need to sit down right now. You're scaring everyone here, including me." The Marines who had been gathered around the center throughout the evening began to form a protective circle around Sarah, their training kicking in as they recognized someone in medical distress. Sergeant Thompson quickly cleared a path while others brought a chair and water. The same men who had arrived that morning feeling broken and alone were now united in their determination to care for the woman who had given everything to help them heal. Sarah tried to wave off their concerns, insisting that she just needed a moment to catch her breath, but as she attempted to speak, her words came out slurred and confused. The notebook she had been clutching throughout the day slipped from her trembling hands, scattering the carefully documented information about each Marine's needs across the floor. Colonel Hayes immediately called for medical personnel, while the Marines around Sarah began implementing the emergency response training they had learned in the military. They checked her pulse, monitored her breathing, and spoke to her in calm, reassuring tones, mirroring the same compassionate approach she had used with them throughout the day. "Stay with us, Miss Martinez," David Thompson said, holding her hand gently. "You've been here for all of us today. Now let us be here for you." As the medical team arrived and began assessing Sarah's condition, the true scope of her day's work became apparent. The scattered papers from her notebook revealed the names and stories of over 300 Marines and family members she had personally assisted in some capacity. Each page contained detailed notes about individual needs, follow-up requirements, and resources she had coordinated. The medics quickly determined that Sarah was suffering from severe dehydration, exhaustion, and dangerously low blood sugar. She had literally worked herself into a medical emergency, pushing her body far beyond its limits in her dedication to serving others. They began administering IV fluids while preparing to transport her to the base hospital. As Sarah's consciousness began to fade, she could hear the voices of the Marines around her expressing their gratitude and concern. Through her dimming awareness, she felt hands gently touching her shoulders and arms, offering the same comfort and support she had provided to them throughout the day. "Ma'am, you saved my life today," she heard Roberto's voice saying. "When I walked in here tonight, I didn't think I wanted to see tomorrow. But you showed me that there are people who care, that there's still hope. You gave me reasons to keep fighting." Similar testimonials came from Marines throughout the crowd, each sharing how Sarah's dedication and compassion had made a difference in their lives. David Thompson spoke about finding his voice again. Carlos Ramirez talked about learning to manage his anxiety, and dozens of others shared stories of hope renewed and healing begun. As the medical team lifted Sarah onto a stretcher, preparing to transport her to the hospital, she managed to whisper a few words that would be remembered by everyone present that night. "Take care of each other. You're all heroes, every single one of you." 3 days later, Sarah woke up in the base hospital to find her room filled with flowers, cards, and handmade gifts from the Marines and families she had helped. The doctors explained that she had suffered from severe exhaustion and dehydration, requiring several days of rest and recovery. They emphasized how fortunate she was that the Marines had recognized her distress and called for help when they did. As Sarah's eyes adjusted to the morning light streaming through her hospital window, she noticed a familiar figure sitting in the chair beside her bed. Colonel Hayes smiled warmly as Sarah regained full consciousness, holding a thick folder that appeared to contain official documents. "Good morning, Martinez." "How are you feeling?" the colonel asked, her voice filled with genuine concern and admiration. Sarah attempted to sit up, immediately asking about the Marines who had been at the center that night. "Are they okay? Did everyone get the help they needed? I had so many follow-up appointments scheduled, and Roberto needed immediate counseling, and David was just starting to open up." Colonel Hayes gently placed her hand on Sarah's arm, stopping her flood of concerned questions. "Sarah, every single Marine you helped that day has been taken care of. Your colleagues have been working around the clock to ensure that all your notes and recommendations were followed through on. But that's not why I'm here today. The colonel opened the folder and pulled out an official document bearing the seal of the United States Marine Corps. What you did 3 days ago has become legendary throughout the military community. Your story has spread to bases across the country, and your dedication has inspired similar support initiatives at veterans centers nationwide. Sarah listened in amazement as Colonel Hayes explained that her actions had triggered a movement within the military community. Marines who had heard about her sacrifice began volunteering at veterans centers, creating support networks for returning service members, and advocating for improved mental health resources. But more importantly, the colonel continued, the 500 Marines from that deployment have collectively requested something unprecedented. They want to honor you with a recognition that has never been given to a civilian before. That afternoon, Sarah was transported in a wheelchair to the base's main parade ground, where she was astonished to find 500 Marines standing in perfect formation. Their families filled the surrounding bleachers, and military officials from across the region had gathered to witness the ceremony. As Sarah was positioned at the front of the formation, she recognized many faces from that extraordinary day at the Veterans Center. David Thompson stood proudly in the front row, his posture straight and his eyes clear. Roberto Vasquez was there too, looking healthy and hopeful. Carlos Ramirez gave her a subtle wave, and Maria Santos blew her a kiss from the family section. The commanding officer began reading a proclamation that had been signed by every single Marine in the battalion. The document detailed Sarah's extraordinary dedication, her selfless service, and the profound impact she had made on their lives and recovery. It described how her willingness to push herself beyond all reasonable limits had demonstrated the true meaning of service and sacrifice. For your unwavering dedication to the welfare of our Marines, for your extraordinary compassion in their time of greatest need, and for your willingness to serve others even at great personal cost, we hereby bestow upon you the title of Honorary Marine, the commanding officer announced. As 500 Marines saluted in unison, Sarah felt tears streaming down her face. She understood that her moment of losing consciousness had not been a failure or a weakness, but rather the culmination of a day that had changed hundreds of lives forever. The ceremony concluded with each Marine personally thanking Sarah, many sharing stories of how that single day had set them on a path toward healing and hope. David Thompson was the last to approach, and he handed her a letter signed by all 500 Marines. Ma'am, you taught us that true strength comes from caring for others, even when we're struggling ourselves. You showed us what it means to serve with honor. We'll carry your example with us for the rest of our lives. As Sarah looked out at the faces of the Marines and their families, she realized that losing consciousness while serving others had led to something far greater than she could have ever imagined. Her dedication had created a ripple effect of healing, hope, and renewed purpose that would continue long after that memorable day at the Veterans Center.